Hello, and welcome to our podcast designed to introduce you to some of the contents of the Handbook of Using Virtual Exchange Across Disciplines, Building Global Citizens from Home, forthcoming from Springer, a part of the Springer International Handbooks of Education series. I'm Dr. Trixie Smith, and I'm the section editor for a collection of chapters focused on Indigenous philosophies and methodologies. I'm I am a professor of rhetoric and writing in the Department of Writing, Rhetoric, and Cultures at Michigan State University, where I direct our graduate programs as well as global alliances in literacy and engagement, affectionately known as GALE. Today, we'll be speaking with Dr. Kelly Tzoumis and Dr. Henry Fowler about their chapter entitled Exploring Environmental Worldviews, Insights from the Navajo Nation Learners in Virtual Exchange. Their chapter argues that virtual exchange offers a powerful methodology for Indigenous studies, sustainability education, and environmental decision making by creating dialogic conditions where Indigenous environmental worldviews can be expressed authentically on their own terms. They further argue that these results can assist with future interactions and preparing for virtual exchanges by non-Indigenous groups of students studying environmental worldviews involving Indigenous learners that are often overlooked in research studies or not well understood without including non-Indigenous partners. I'm going to let Kelly and Henry introduce themselves and how they built their working relationship.
Henry, you go first.
Hello, my name is Henry Fowler. I'm associate math professor at Navajo Technical University. Navajo Technical University is one of the tribal college and university in the United States. Do todich eat in shlo ajis kapah pashishin tlaslan dashiche do ye et hachin in dashanale. I am a bitter water connected to my mother's clan, and I am Zuni water connected to my father's clan.
My name is Kelly Tzoumis. I'm an emeritus professor, retired from DePaul University, and currently teaching at Johns Hopkins University on environmental decision making in the Whiting School of Engineering. Happy to be here today.
Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about how the two of you came to work together?
Henry, you go.
Our collaboration began through a shared commitment to creating a meaningful global learning experiences. For my students, I always look for where my students can grow and to be themselves and understand more about what's happening beyond Navajo Nation. And through our virtual exchange with DePaul University, it was an excitement for my students, and it was also exciting for myself as their instructor. And one day, I got an email from DePaul University, and I didn't know who this person was. And I decided to respond back to this individual. And just because when I was in the graduate program, DePaul University had a good basketball team. And that's who I just associated DePaul with back then. And so, wow, I said, DePaul, they used to have a good basketball team, good college basketball team. So let me just respond back to this person. And here I met Kelly, and Kelly was very collegial and very responding and very positive. And once I returned my email to Kelly, she emailed me back and she asked if I could join the virtual exchange using COIL method. And all that was new for me, but through her guidance as well as all the network that she had and that made me comfortable and also and wanted to explore more for myself, for my professional development, as well as also to increase learning and to enhance and elevate my students' understanding about who they are from the nest studies approach. So I worked in two departments as a math instructor and also as the nest studies, Navajo studies. And so this collaboration was through the nest studies at Navajo Technical University.
Okay. And yes, I did a blind email to reach out to Henry. I particularly wanted somebody, a professor from the Navajo Nation, because I was teaching nuclear waste and nuclear energy policy at DePaul at the time. And so I felt that for the subject matter, I needed to get somebody from the Navajo Nation because that is the geographical location where we first mined the uranium, both for in 1944 for nuclear weaponry development as well as the buildup in the Cold War after, and all the way through to 1986 with civilian nuclear energy, which we are still struggling to figure out how to deal with the waste. And I had to get somebody from France because of France's leadership until recently on becoming very independent in their energy consumption. So they were very heavily at the time dependent on nuclear, weaned off, went to renewables, and now have resumed going back to a nuclear commitment. So having these two cultures in the class, I thought was critical for teaching the learners on the topic of nuclear energy and nuclear policy. Also, I want to frame a little bit. I originally had worked in the national laboratories and for the US Department of Energy. So I was most concerned about trust, that I would gain the trust of somebody who was still impacted in an environmental justice or an energy justice issue, where we have about 500 uranium mines still on the Navajo Nation, and only half have been secured or even remediated for that community. And they have suffered greatly from the impacts of this mining and the remaining mines that are still there. So I was really happy when Henry responded to my email, and we have become, I think we've built trust and collegial professionalism between us, as well as trust as individuals for our work. And so we've published many things and have traveled to conferences, many different countries, talking about what we do, including the energy issues, the uranium issues, and worldviews. And so I'm gonna turn now to the worldviews part, because I think that our learners both really greatly benefited from understanding each other. I don't know if you remember this, Henry, but you you called me, oh, I think the night before we were going to do our first launch, and it was in the middle of COVID, and your nation was dramatically impacted and your learners. Um, can you mention it all before I talk about the actual chapter? Can you mention it all about what happened to your learners when we were first starting in the midst of COVID? Do you remember the struggles they had driving and hand washing?
Yeah, COVID hit us on I really remember in March of 2020, and we had a very high infection rates fast immediately. It hit one of our small rural community quickly, and they had to close that community down. And that is Chimpito, which is in the Arizona side of the Navajo Nation. And it was very widespread in that community, and from there it just triggered to the whole Navajo people because many homes on Navajo Nation, we don't have running water, electricity, and so one of the prevention from COVID was hand washing. So if you don't have running water and electricity in your home, hand washing became difficult because you had to haul your water from a nearby windmill, and which takes bumpy roads just to get to a windmill and to bring back your water and water barrel. And we had also had high health disparities like heart disease and diabetes, and combined with this COVID, it makes so life to be difficult and a struggle for Navajo people. And as well as we had to close our schools down, we had to close Navajo Technical University, and we had to rely on technology. And even our internet was not very, had poor services, had poor connections. So we were just going through this experiment of not knowing what's happening, what's going on. And but our students remain resilient, and technology became a way to communicate with our students using email, the email system or phone or texting one another. And that's how our students did their first virtual exchange with DePaul University, and as well as with Kelly's collaborative international virtual exchange partnership.
I thought it was key because I remember the night before when we talked, you proposed canceling our first exchange. And I spent the night thinking about it, and I called you back, I remember, or emailed you back and said, "Oh, you know what? I know this is tough on all of our students, but let's not take this also away from them." This was a form of kind of social interaction, a form of sharing. I had several students in the class at the time from Little Village, which is a Hispanic environmental justice community and the portal entry in Chicago for many of our Hispanic and particularly Mexican American students. So I didn't want to take that away from them, and so we put it together. We accommodated, and we made sure that our students both knew that if they had to reschedule, they had to reschedule. If there was a problem they had to attend to in their household or community, that we had to have acceptance of each other's burdens. And it actually worked. And they recorded a panel video talking about this for the archives, the COVID archives in DePaul. And the Little Village students actually were very impacted by the stories of what you just said regarding hand washing, because our CDC was just talking about hand washing all the time and masks. And so I think that collaborative, bringing the students together to interact, was in the end the right decision, even though they had to struggle at times to do so. They found ways. They were very innovative in how they did it. But what was really important, I think, for this chapter was how we brought many countries together, and we did so in the same course. And they were working on looking at environmental worldviews, because that really, if we're going to talk about SDGs or talk about how people behave, we have to start with their worldviews, and that is dramatically impacted, right, by culture. And I think we did some real innovative things in this course about how to measure and how to explore the worldviews of different cultures, including the Navajo Nation. Originally, we had a very large data set that was published last year that contained Brazil, France, Greece, Morocco, the Navajo Nation, and the US students. It was over 800 students answering the same questions about worldviews. Very simply, 15 questions that are well known. I actually checked this morning. It's a survey called the New Ecological Paradigm, 15 questions, reversed ordered. And there's almost 24,000 sites on Google Scholar. So this questionnaire that we used had been around since 1970s and was revamped in early 2000 to the New Ecological Paradigm, and it had been used globally. So I felt questionnaire validity. I felt comfortable using it. And we reported on the multiple countries, but really didn't get an opportunity to qualitatively dive into just the Navajo Nation learners. And I thought that was important to do in this current book and this current section under Trixie, and really write about deeply understanding the culture. So in this chapter, we took 19 students who responded. That's actually a pretty large number for the university because it is a tribal nation college in the US. And these 15 questions were compared. And we found in the last study, the largest study with Brazil, France, Greece, Morocco, US, Navajo, that the Navajo Nation learners were most closely aligned with the Brazilian learners in their environmental worldview based on this New Ecological Paradigm 15 question survey. And the Navajo learner was least like Morocco. So that was very informative, and we showed how. But we never got to the cultural understanding of the Navajo Nation and the Navajo learner. And I'm going to turn to Henry here in a minute, but the two big points that came out of this very detailed study looking at the Navajo culture was on the NEP, on that New Ecological Survey. It was the Navajo learner that was very concerned about ecological catastrophe, and especially the question on the rights of nature. And I think they showed a real cohesive response to protecting the rights of nature, understanding the rights of nature with humans, and the cultural humility and spiritual law in the ecological catastrophe question, much more so than the other countries. And so what I'd like to do now is, Henry, I would like you to put into context these two major questions that we found in the NEP, that the rights of nature, and then the concern by your learners about ecological catastrophe. If you could put that into the indigenous Dene culture explanation for your learner, I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, during the virtual exchange, as from Navajo students, Dene students, we call ourselves Dene, or the five-fingered people, and the new the NAP, the framework designed to measure how humans understand their relationship with nature. And it for my students, it is profoundly connected to nature. Nature is, to us, or the universe, we say that it's our library. And we listen to nature, and we look for patterns, and we take that into a meaningful, practical life for the net people. And earth is our nahasa, meaning earth is our mother. So we relate to earth as it is also like our biological mother, who gave us life. So we view Earth that way. It gave us life for all people and for all life. And the sky is also, we relate to the sky as our father sky. And plants and animals, water, wind are not just objects to us. They are relatives. They are living beings. Even a rock we view as living entity, a life force that connects all existence. That's how we relate to nature. And our students had that mindset and had that cultural teaching, that cultural understanding that makes them who they are as the students. And that the truth carries through generation, this type of teaching. It's a oral story that our elders teach us through storytelling, through stories, and we would listen to them. And we have that respect for our Navajo elders, and their wisdom is very deep and profound. And that Navajo has this special, we call it relational thinking with all system, that we acknowledge them, and that all system, we look at it as that we are a web in that system, and that makes us who we are, as unique as the people. And the Dene philosophy is guided by Ke. Ke is a kinship. To live in Ke is to recognize that every action toward the earth is an action toward a relative. And to harm the land is to harm oneself. And to care for the land is to restore balance. And this is what it means to walk in balance, is we call it Hojon. Hojon is a pathway of harmony, respect, and beauty in all four directions. And this is conversation. It's very deep for my students that participated in this virtual exchange. And we protect the environment, and we protect the water. Water is so valuable to us here in the Southwest, in the United States. So we are to be balanced, and I think that's how my students, billion students, is that they had that same NAP relationship to respect nature and to respect the earth and to respect the universe and to maintain that hojon, that state of peace with yourself, who you are as an individual.
I think that really is important, because the two questions, as I said earlier, that were really standing out of the 15 that other students answered. But the two that stood out from the Navajo learner in the NEP, in the new ecological paradigm, was humans, number 5, humans are seriously, number 7, plants and animals have as much right as humans to exist. And that you just described exquisitely. The closest we get to that in the Western literature, environmental literature, is the deep ecology literature that really became to the forefront in the 1980s, and environmental ethics journals and environmental studies focused on plants and animals having rights to exist. And you just described that in an exquisite way in the non-Western literature, in the indigenous Navajo culture. And then the second question that I think, really stood out from other countries and stood out with the Navajo learner is the statement of number 15 in the survey. If things continue on their present course, we will soon experience a major ecological catastrophe. And the other students really from the different countries didn't all agree on this, but the Navajo learner did. Do you want to say something more about the Navajo learner interpreting that concern of ecological catastrophe, Henry?
Yeah, there is a lot of injustice for Navajo people, and one is like the uranium mine, for instance. There are still like over 500 uranium mines that are still open. And so I think that's what my students are referring to, some of these, some areas that are injustice for Navajo people. And if they stay that course, they feel that, that there is a intention that we may ruin the earth, and so that to live in harmony for my students, they believe that that balance, that hojon, is beginning to be unbalanced. And when things are unbalanced, you do see affects everything. And one that it can affect more is nchi, we call it, is air, the air beings. And if our air gets contaminated with elements, with open uranium mines, and we had a also Peabody Coal Company that also devastated the environment too. So I think that's what the students, they look at, that will have a long-term impact on Navajo people and on people here in the Southwest in Arizona. And so when the hojo is broken with the contamination of water from the uranium mining, with the contamination of our air, and that it is predictable that the more that the earth that we're living, we see our plants are changing, and we feel the weather and the climate is changing, and we don't see as much snowfall anymore, how we used to see about 20 years ago. And the weather is getting a little bit more hot in the summertime, so it's getting a little extreme. And there was a study that was done, Peabody Coal Company. There was a grandma that she said she's a weaver. She weaves nice, beautiful Navajo rugs. And so to weave, you have to know your plants, which plants makes a certain color to your yarn. So she said when she started weaving, she would use the sage bush plant, and it gave her wool dye like a really nice, gentle, light green color. And she said once Peabody started operating the coal company, she started using the same plant, but her dye of her wool was not how it was, nice hued light green color like sage leaf, but it was more becoming like black color. So she got worried, and that even the plants are speaking to us. that they are feeling the change of the environment that is happening here in the Southwest. So a lot of those relational system thinking, that's what my students refer to about number 15 on the NEP questions.
Thank you. This is such important work and important understandings. I'd like to, as you've been explaining these concepts and how your students learn this is what they know and what they live. How was that enhanced by or impacted by the virtual exchange with the other students? How did it help them even learn their own concepts or concretize them or apply them in these other things in terms of environmental decision making and conversation? So, what was the impact of the virtual exchange?
Henry, you go. I think what you have to say is going to be really important.
The virtual exchange allowed my students to live the principle of Sanaharabik Ehojon in a global space. Sanaharabik Ehojon is thinking Ntsahakes. Students began asking deeper questions. Who am I as a Dene person in a global world? What knowledge do I carry? And Sanalebik Ehojon is also planning. The students prepared not just to do presentation, but intentions, how to present themselves with respect and clarity and responsibility. And Sanalebik Ehojon is also living. And my students, they engage in dialogue. They were not as passive learners, but they participate in shared human experience, exchange ideas, stories, and ways of knowing. And also, Sanalebik Ehojon is a self-reflection. They came to understanding something profound, that their identity, their language, their teachings are not they're not like barriers to learning, but pathways to deeper understanding. What emerged was not just an academic growth, it was awakening. Students began to see that knowledge is not owned, it is shared in relationship. Learning is not individual, it is a collective and interdependent. And education is not only about mastering content, it's about restoring balance. They spoke about environmental responsibility, not as theory, but as lived experience, rooted in histories of land survival and resilience. They shared that harming the earth is not just to damage the environment, it is a disruption of harmony of Hojo.
You know, on the for my learners, on the other side of this coin is my learners gained a huge amount of intercultural skill building by doing the first meeting and icebreakers, and then doing the second meeting with the NEP, and we had the results programmed into Caltrex. So the students took this NEP survey, and we had bar charts immediately come up so that in the discussion, that second meeting, the students actually compared their results with other learners in their home institution, as well as across the institutions with the Navajo Nation. And a couple things came out for my learners. First of all, in the United States, our dominant social paradigm is property rights. It's one of the fundamentals, market economies, capitalism. And so my students were amazed at talking with the Navajo learners and hearing the differences in how they view nature and land and especially land, but also the air, the rock, and what they consider as living matter in this balance. My students had never really read that kind of literature before, and they were quite surprised and had to become informed about the Navajo Dene culture in how they view the earth and how they view the resources of the earth. And so much so, I did have supplementary cultural readings in the course where authors talked about the notion of property rights. Originally, when those uranium mines were created, the word property right was not even and uranium was not even in the vocabulary of the Navajo Dene language. And so that was really interesting for my students. And I think it brought much more to the learning experience for my students because it was more than just reading the accounts of property and the issues of dominant social paradigm in the US. And here, the Navajo, I can say pretty much, I would say out of all the years I taught with Henry, that none of my students had encountered a conversation with a Navajo learner. And so they were excited by this. They were very interested into talking to someone who lived within the continental US, but had very different views on the world in terms of the environment based on culture, based on their cultural experiences. And so, and also my learner was primarily urban, many times Hispanic, because of the cultural makeup of the Chicago area. We did have international learners from around the world at that time throughout the years from many different cultures inside of my class, as well as, other global learners that came from my partners in Brazil and France, Greece, Morocco, the US. They all came together and actually had discussions using the NEP with the learners in the Navajo Nation. And all of them, the feedback that we got was that it was a profound impact on them to hear from people around the world, but particularly the Navajo Nation, because of the very non-Western views of nature that perhaps my students did not consider until that time, until they started some readings in the class and started thinking about energy policy and environmental justice and energy justice. And many of them didn't know the history about the uranium mines or what the Navajo Nation was still undergoing in terms of public health risks and public health impacts. So I think the virtual exchange experience made it real, made it very real what they were reading and hearing in the class. And we had a lot of students, for instance, I'm in the disability community. And so I have a lot of students that followed me who are disabled and would never be able to travel to these many countries, even the Navajo Nation in the continental US. And so they were really impacted by having this one-to-one synchronous conversations with Henry's learners.
Thank you. These are, I think you've really touched on the the strong impact that this had on students from multiple locations. I'm just wondering if there's anything else that you think would have been missed if you hadn't been studying this through virtual exchange.
Henry, you go.
I think without virtual exchange, something essential, something deeply human would have been left behind. we would have missed the moment when a student realizes I'm not outside of knowledge, I'm part of it. And that we 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 have missed also we will miss the recognition that the knowledge is not on the margins, but rooted and enduring the necessary for the world we live in today. The realization that across oceans and continents, students are seeking the same questions, not academic questions, but human ones. Who am I, and where do I belong, and how do I live in a good way? So I think my students would miss some of those profound good questions. Where do I belong in this global world? And where does my culture belong in this global setting? Because we're very rural in on Navajo Nation, and our Navajo Nation is the size of West Virginia, the state. And also, we would have missed the transformation of learning itself from something we receive to something we enter into together, where knowledge is not delivered but shared, respected, and carried in relationship. But even deeper than that, we would have missed the opportunity to bring into a global education. And is not a concept you simply explain. It is something you live. It teaches us that relationship is not optional, it is the foundational. That when we enter another person, we do not stand apart, we stand in relation. And with that relationship comes with responsibilities to listen, not just to respond, but to understand, and to speak, not just to be heard, but to uplift, to engage, not just intellectually, but ethically and respectfully. Without virtual exchange, education can remain distant, organized, structure, complete on paper, but disconnected from identity, disconnected from responsibility, and disconnected from what it truly means to learn. So my learners, my students, did not simply just exchange ideas. They began to see one another, not as strangers, not as countries, not as differences to be compared, but as human beings, each carrying history, memory, struggle, resilience, and hope. And the space between them and learning became something more than knowledge. And at the end, it comes back to ke is relationship, responsibility, and transformation.
That was so beautifully said and so well said, Henry. I have nothing more to add to that, Trixie, because I just think that was beautifully said and incorporates our students both globally and those in the U.S.
Thank you both. This has been a lovely conversation. Loved learning about your work together and the impact that it had. And it resonates so well, interestingly, with the work that I do with indigenous communities in Africa. This same idea about relationships and responsibility is definitely echoed through indigenous thought around the world. And this idea of being humans with humans, I think, is so important. Thank you both for sharing with us today, and I hope many of our listeners will also be our readers in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yep, thank you.